Autumn leaves rustled loudly underfoot. Helen walked through the park, immersed in her memories, watching Buddy as he raced back and forth, playing with fallen leaves. As any other happy dog, he had not always been happy. A year and a half ago, when he was just a puppy, he wandered from garbage cans to food stands and back again, trying to get something to eat. He didn't get food very often, as the area was already full of older and stronger stray dogs. They didn't want any competition, so they often replaced Buddy's lunch with growling and attacking. Once, when hunger was so strong that it became more frightening than sharp canines, the puppy risked grabbing a piece of sausage, ignoring the warning growl. Then he was badly bitten. Not daring to step into the ominous darkness, he was whining at the bus stop, avoided by the other dogs who wisely avoided people. Helen found him there. He was trembling with many wounds on his tiny body. Now, instead of an ugly skinny scared creature with an uncertain color of fur, a vigorous big dog was chasing around the park, keeping his dearest mistress in sight. Well, at least now I'll have someone by my side, she thought cheerfully, pushing away the memories of Carlos. The pain seemed so old, but it had never fully subsided. She suffered too much back then. Looking inside herself, Helen couldn't answer what tormented her more, the fact that Carlos had left her for a younger and more promising daughter of a famous doctor, or the disgusting tricks they had organized to kick her out of her favorite job. And she still didn't understand why they did it. Helen called Buddy's name and hurried home. It was time to get ready for work. She always felt better at work. Work she didn't like, working in the ambulance, as much as she liked working at the hospital with familiar patients. But at least she felt needed. Urgent calls, unpredictable circumstances, it all reminded her of working on the front line. Her new colleagues could understand everything without words, and if necessary, they would always help. Helen also helped them a lot. She could switch shifts with them or help with diagnosis in complicated cases. However, it didn't increase her paycheck. But, as they say, you can't earn all the money. For example, Adam didn't understand why someone would sacrifice themselves for the sake of helping others. Sometimes he acted like he wasn't human. He was another painful page in Helen's life. Adam was smart, full of energy, and very cunning. He could never understand why she worked in an ambulance day and night for pennies. She could get a job at the front desk of a private clinic for the same miserable salary, answer the phone, always finish her workday on time, and go home to cook a delicious dinner for her beloved man. He believed that if a person was not paid well, it was not worth sacrificing your time to help people. So, after a few quarrels caused by empty shelves in the refrigerator and dark circles under Helen's eyes, Adam said it was pointless to continue their living together. Helen liked the man very much, but she couldn't imagine herself at the reception desk because helping others was what her life was all about. So, Adam became her ex-boyfriend without ever having had time to be her husband. At work, sad thoughts were pushed aside as usual when Helen received another call. She mentioned that they rarely went to this neighborhood. The owners of luxury mansions could afford ambulance services from private hospitals. "We're going to the rich guys," Peter joked cheerfully, starting the car and wondering whether to turn on the siren or not. The neighborhood turned out to be very prestigious. High fences with automatic gates could not completely hide either luxurious houses looking like ancient castles or modern mansions with verandas made of glass. The ambulance came to an old-fashioned mansion. There, the team was met by a young man who friendly invited them to the second floor. They could detect a slight accent in his voice. Is he a foreigner, or has he not been to his homeland for a long time? Helen wondered as she climbed the stairs, which were covered with a green carpet that looked like grass. The patient was an elderly woman with a large nose and huge rings on her fingers. A young attractive girl was standing next to the elderly woman, looking at them intently and distrustfully. "So, what happened?" Helen asked, opening her suitcase and pulling out a blood pressure monitor. "I don't understand what's wrong with me," the patient said in a weak voice, running her long thin fingers over her forehead. "I feel like I'm on fire, severe pain behind my breasts, headaches terribly. Do you have any idea what caused such a state?" At these words, Helen involuntarily noted that the young man and his female companion tensed up, glancing anxiously at the old woman. I don't know. Everything seemed to be fine. I haven't even left the house for the last week. The patient glanced discreetly but meaningfully at the young couple standing behind her. But today I got up, and my legs couldn't hold me up. There's something wrong here. A suspicious thought flashed through her mind. This elderly lady obviously can't say everything she wants to say, and the couple is visibly nervous. Probably, they are afraid that she will say something unnecessary. Bring me a chair, please. Helen decided to check her suspicions. And some water, please. I'm very thirsty. She noticed that while the young man went to bring the chair, the girl stayed there near the sick woman. She only went to the kitchen to bring a glass of water when her companion returned. Weird. They look like guards in a prison. They clearly don't want to leave this lady alone with anyone, Helen thought. Her blood pressure was perfectly normal, except that her pulse was a little fast. Her heart was beating loudly but steadily, with no interruptions or murmur. Reflexes were normal too, no sweating, no cold limbs, no stomach pain. But her eyes, tense, desperate, begging for something. Looks like the old lady didn't need an ambulance for medical assistance. Then what is it for? What's going on here? Let's measure her temperature, Helen said, intending to put a thermometer under the patient's arm. The lady began to open the collar of her robe. At that moment, Helen felt a tiny folded piece of paper slip into her hand. Got it, she thought, and pressing the note with her little finger, began to examine the thermometer display. The temperature was normal, as expected, but that wasn't really important now. Don't worry. You just have neurocirculatory dystonia, Helen reassured the patient as she wrote down the difficult diagnosis. The symptoms are unpleasant but not dangerous. Usually, younger people suffer from it nowadays. I'll prescribe vitamins, sedatives, and vasodilators. You should take them for a couple of weeks, and you'll be back to normal. The weather's changing dramatically now, and a lot of people have a negative reaction to it. But you should definitely go out to get some fresh air every day. I'll ask your children to help you. Smiling contentedly, the young man nodded, but the girl's face still expressed nothing but tension. What have you been doing in there so long? Peter grumbled to Helen as he swung the car door open. Your shift's over. It's time to go home. Peter, where's the nearest police station? Helen asked, not taking her eyes off the tiny piece of paper. It looks like we need to get there right away. The little piece of paper, slightly moistened in her sweaty hand, said in broken handwriting, "Help. I'm being held here against my will. They want to get the inheritance, forcing me to sign the papers." The police officer on duty was drinking tea, but after listening to Helen's excited story, he resolutely pushed aside the plate of cookies and immediately sent the police squad there. I hope they will get there in time, the woman thought as she signed the report and headed for the exit. That old lady is stubborn. She didn't give up right away. Good for her. For some reason, Helen couldn't stop thinking about that old lady for the next few days. Helen was stressed out, wondering what the police had done and whether they had made it in time. Finally, she couldn't stand it any longer and went to that luxury neighborhood. A guard opened the gate when Helen asked if the landlady was at home. He cautiously asked her, Who are you? I'm a doctor. I visited her recently, and I decided to check on her to make sure she is all right. The guard called someone and then respectfully stepped aside. Come in. Deborah is waiting for you. This time, the lady was downstairs in the living room. Her face was tired but already calm. Come in, my dear. Take a seat. I'll ask for some tea now. I don't even know how to express my gratitude to you. You saved my life. There's no need to thank me. I didn't come for that. I just wanted to know if the police got here in time. Thanks to you, they arrived on time. Some smart guys came. I don't know what this unit is called. They managed to enter the house unnoticed, took those bastards away. I didn't have time to realize anything. It all happened so fast. Then they talked to me for a long time, asking me what happened, and I told them everything. I hope they will get the punishment they deserve. You're a brave girl. You did a great job. To be honest, I was already saying goodbye to my life. Did they threaten you? Torture you? There are many ways to torture. I wasn't always lonely. I had a husband and a son, like many other people. At first, we lived very well, and then very poorly. The better it was in financial terms, the worse it was mentally. My husband's business was successful. He lived for the sake of it. He was almost never at home, but he had a passion for the business. Then the passion disappeared. He was always gloomy and would work on some documents at night, arguing with someone on the phone. Then some powerful person supported him. He calmed down a little, but his competitors didn't leave him alone. I must say, my husband was terribly jealous. He was just a nice little boy compared to my husband back then. I was very attractive. A lot of men liked me. But knowing how jealous my husband was, I stayed at home all the time, like a prisoner. But his new patron came to our house himself. He was very kind. Nothing more, but that was enough for my husband. He got jealous. Everything seemed normal for a while. But then, his assistant called me and said, "Deborah, I just wanted to warn you. I checked your husband's mail today. Someone sent him a picture of you with." And she said the name of our patron. "You're cuddling with him in a restaurant. Your husband is furious. He's already finished a bottle of whiskey from the bar. He's on his way home now." I knew right away the pictures were fake. I wasn't at the restaurant with anyone. I think it was done by the people my husband was trying to protect himself from, but it was used less to explain it to him. I knew his temper well enough. I called our patron, warned him, and went to my sister's to wait while my husband calmed down. That day he broke almost everything in the house and filed for divorce. My attempts to explain anything were unsuccessful. My husband sold his business, I think to those who had sent the pictures, took our son, and immigrated to another country. That happened 25 years ago. I haven't seen him or my child ever again since. He never even sent me any pictures. I think he had told our son his own version of events because the boy never made any attempt to contact me. I wasn't myself after that nightmare. I even ended up in rehab. Then I recovered. Our patron didn't leave me. He offered me a good job and helped me in every possible way. And a few years later, he was widowed and proposed to me. He joked, "We have to make our long-term love affair official." And so, I became the wife of a very rich man. Unlike my first marriage, he and I lived in harmony. He was a very clever man, very sensitive, very caring. But 2 years ago, he died. I don't know how I survived this loss. There was absolutely no reason for me to live. We had no children. He had no children from his first marriage. I'm the sole heir to a huge fortune, but why would I need his fortune without him? But I pulled myself together. When he was dying, he kept saying, "Deborah, I'm asking you to cope with everything and live happily without me. Promise me." I made that promise. What else could I do? I think that promise is the only reason I'm still alive. Deborah fell silent for a moment, and Helen was afraid to break the silence even with her breath. After a minute or two, the old lady pulled herself together and continued. "And recently, this couple showed up. First, I received a letter, supposedly from my son. He wrote that he had changed his attitude towards me, wanted to see me and reconcile, to introduce me to his future wife. Obviously, I invited him to my house. I was very excited. It's no joke, 25 years of separation. I thought I wouldn't recognize him at all. A couple of weeks ago, these two showed up. At first, I didn't suspect anything. But then they started talking about the expansion of my business, about the distance between the two continents, and that I should make a will. I wondered, why would he need a will? He's the only heir anyway. Then he got more and more insistent, and then he said, "When we used to go to the sea, to a resort town, and he started describing a completely different place. My son and I had never been there, and we had never climbed to the lake in the mountains. That's when I started to look more closely. The more I looked at him, the more I was convinced that it was not my son. Meanwhile, they literally followed me everywhere I went and wouldn't let me leave the house. It seemed like a reasonable pretext, but frankly speaking, such coldness and relentlessness from them made me afraid for my life. That's why I've decided to pretend I'm having an attack of some unknown disease. Now you know the rest of the story. Deborah, aren't you afraid to be here alone right now? Helen said sympathetically. Of course, I'm afraid, but what can I do? If you want, I can visit you sometimes. I'm all alone too, there's no one to talk to but my colleagues. I promise not to ask you to sign a will. Yeah, I realize you're not going to ask for everything, Deborah smiled with the corners of her mouth. You're not that kind of woman. Come whenever you like, you'll distract me from my memories. Thus, their strange friendship began. Deborah lightened up her lonely old age with heart-to-heart talks, and Helen found in this woman understanding of all the troubles of her rough and messy life and a mother's warmth that softened the cold loneliness of her childhood in the orphanage. They both looked forward to these meetings and talked for hours, obeying the strong, sudden bond that had developed since the first minutes of their acquaintance. One day, Helen came to Deborah right after her shift and found her in a very bad state. Her eyes were filled with tears, her blood pressure was skyrocketing, and her heart was pounding so hard that it seemed to burst out of her chest. What's wrong, Deborah? Who has upset you so much? The investigator has been here. They've unmasked those imposters. They really came from another country. They're immigrants too. That's why they speak our language so well. It turned out they met my son, Gregory, when they were on vacation at a resort. The alcohol did its job, and my naive boy told them everything about me, about my second marriage, and the fantastic inheritance. That's when they planned their evil crime. They forged the documents, kidnapped Gregory to get my address, and even tortured him. And when they got the information they needed, they just killed my boy, my dear little boy, Helen. How am I supposed to live with this now? The old woman burst into bitter tears. Calm down, Deborah, Helen said, preparing a syringe with a sedative. I'll give you a shot now so you can get some sleep. I'll stay with you tonight. I only need to call my neighbor and ask her to walk and feed my dog. Tomorrow is my day off. I won't leave you. Wait a little, you'll feel better now. After taking all the necessary medication, Deborah fell into a deep sleep. Helen decided to stay in the same room to make sure that Deborah was okay. She was thinking about the twists and turns of life and the terrible loneliness of people who seemed to be happy. In the morning, Helen finally fell asleep. Suddenly, strange sounds instantly broke through the dream. Helen jumped up from a cozy armchair. There was a wheezing sound coming from Deborah's bed. Her face was pale, she was trembling, and her breathing was intermittent. Suddenly, a violent cough shook her whole body, and Helen saw red droplets dripping onto the pillow from the corner of her mouth. Pulmonary embolism, a professional thought flashed through her mind. Looks like she needs urgent surgery. A gurney was already waiting in the emergency room, and the operating room was ready. It seems that the wait will be long. After saying goodbye to Peter, Helen sank into a chair at the hospital corridor and closed her eyes. The minutes dragged by unbearably slowly. The sun had already risen fully above the horizon, coloring the houses with a golden glow. Suddenly, some noise was heard outside the door. A doctor came out of the room and walked briskly toward Helen, who jumped up from her chair. "Are you a family member?" he inquired in a dry voice. "No, why? What happened?" Her dry lips refused to let the words out. "Is she awake?" "It's too bad you're not a family member," the doctor said. "She's alive, but she needs blood immediately. But the blood type and phenotype are rare. We don't have it here, nor in the nearest hospitals, and the transfusion station has no such blood left either. We may not be able to save her." "What type?" Helen almost shouted. "I'm a universal donor," I'm AB positive. Are you sure you're not related to her? The doctor's eyebrows raised rapidly. I don't believe in such coincidences. She's also a positive. Let's go for a direct transfusion urgently. After the blood transfusion and the nervousness, she felt a little dizzy, but that was no big deal. But this weird coincidence with the blood type made her uncomfortable. As a medical professional, Helen knew that only 5% of the world's population had this blood type. At the university, they didn't pay much attention to the theory of probability classes. Even without any calculations, it was clear how low the probability of a match of this blood type was. The childhood in the orphanage made her secretly dream not only about foster parents, but also about distant relatives who could come and take the child from the orphanage to a cozy, warm home. One day, there was no strength to go home with all these thoughts, and Helen, in search of the doctor who didn't believe in coincidences, knocked on the staff room door. The doctor was sitting at his desk, filling out a medical record. Helen coughed cautiously. "Oh, is that you? Why are you still here?" "Deborah's fine. She's in the ICU under observation. They'll monitor her, but you need to get some rest after the transfusion, dear, and eat a hearty meal." Dr. Helen hesitated. "Doctor, you said you don't believe in coincidences." "Yes, I don't." The doctor adjusted his glasses on his nose, "especially coincidences like this. That's why I was wondering, is it possible to do a DNA test? I grew up in an orphanage. I don't know anything about my relatives. I can't stop thinking about this coincidence." The doctor nodded understandingly and began to fill in some forms with small letters. Then he held it out to Helen. "Here's the referral. A lab address is on the form. Take a sample of the material from our doctors and go." The days of waiting for the test results dragged on long and agonizingly. Neither work nor walks with Buddy nor regular visits to Deborah helped. After the surgery, the old woman felt much better and was surrounded by the attention of doctors and the care of the medical staff. Deborah always enjoyed Helen's visits, and Helen was carefully trying to hide her impatient tension. But even the longest waiting comes to an end. Finally, Helen was holding a piece of paper with trembling hands. What was in it? Her breath hitched, and her heart beat a resounding thump. The sheet was unfolded, her eyes darkened. 99.9%, she and Deborah were close relatives, maybe even mother and daughter. So how should Helen tell her? How should she ask Deborah about the deeply hidden secrets of her past? She almost died after hearing the news of her son's death and had to undergo such a complicated surgery. We should wait a little longer and let her recover. After 3 weeks of hospitalization, Deborah was finally discharged from the hospital and went home. But after everything she had been through, she was afraid to be alone and asked Helen to move in together with Buddy for a while. Helen gladly agreed. She could take care of the old lady without having to drive from across the city every day. Life began to take a new direction. Now it was slow and relaxed, with heartwarming tea parties in the evenings. Deborah even looked younger, her eyes sparkled, and her face looked peaceful. Finally, on one of those evenings, Helen made up her mind. "Deborah, you and I have the most rare blood type. The test confirmed that we are related." "How could you and I be related?" Deborah's lips trembled, and her thin fingers brushed away the tears that rolled down her cheeks. "My past is coming back to me so rapidly. I thought I would die without ever meeting you. It's a very long story, Helen. My first husband, Ronald, and I grew up in the same neighborhood. We had a company of 5 or 6 people. At first, we played childish games, then we started to grow up and fall in love. My neighbor, Natalie, liked Ronald a lot. She didn't just like him, she was madly in love with him. He was a handsome, cheerful guy. He sang great songs and played the guitar. It was impossible not to fall in love with him. Ronald didn't notice her at first, but then we started to see them together. They say that in a couple, one person loves sincerely, and the other one lets their partner love them. That was exactly about Natalie and Ronald. Ronald graciously allowed Natalie to love him, and that was enough for Natalie. I wasn't interested in anything about their relationship. I had to prepare for university. I had other things to worry about. I entered university and moved to another city. Ronald went into the army, and Natalie stayed in our town. She graduated from medical school and became a midwife in a maternity hospital. Ronald came back from the army mature and confident. I still remember the astonishment of everyone in the neighborhood when he showed up in his military uniform with a brown suitcase in his hands. Natalie was over the moon, shining with happiness, and Ronald? Let's just say he wasn't excited. Although he didn't push Natalie away, maybe something would have worked out between them if Ronald and I hadn't run into each other. When I was on my way to the disco, I was in a great mood. My new shoes clattering on the pavement, my loose hair waving in the breeze. Ronald stopped me and said, "You look like a movie star now." I wrinkled my nose and hurried on. Since then, Ronald started courting me. I can't say I fell in love, but I was flattered. I knew about Natalie's feelings, but it didn't seem important to me. After all, I never did anything to be with Ronald. I certainly didn't want to ruin their relationship, but I didn't do anything to stop his courtship either. And then I fell in love. Anyway, he and I got married, and Natalie stopped even saying hello to me ironically. When I came to the hospital in labor, it was her shift, and she had to take my delivery. I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, but they brought me only the boy. They said that the girl was very weak and didn't survive. I cried so hard that my meal disappeared because I really wanted a daughter, but I couldn't do anything about it. At least the boy survived. Ronald was over the moon when he took me home from the hospital. We lived together, raising Gregory. Many years have passed, and when my son was already 18 years old, when he and his father had already lived in another country for a long time, the phone rang in my house. It was Natalie, who was already sick and dying. When you're on your deathbed, many resentments seem insignificant, and she confessed to me that she had switched my baby girl in the hospital. There was another woman giving birth the same day. She was not young and not quite well off, so her baby girl was born dead, and Natalie decided to bring her to my daughter instead of her dead baby. She was heartbroken over her failed happiness with Ronald, my second husband, and I tried to search for you, but we couldn't find you. Natalie gave you to a woman who was an alcoholic, and children were a burden to her, so she brought you to the orphanage and left you there. But by that time, you had long since left the orphanage, and there was no information about your current address. We hired private detectives at that time, but their search was not successful either. I guess it wasn't the right time, and now the time has come. You came to my house yourself, my daughter. A spasm seized Helen's throat. She had imagined this meeting so many times in her childhood dreams. She had imagined her mother to be anything but a wealthy high society woman with endlessly sad eyes and a philosophical attitude toward life. Unable to utter a word, she approached Deborah and hugged her tightly. They remained silent for a while. I moved far away from our city then. I wanted to start a new life. But now, you and I will never part again, Helen finally managed to say. Of course, darling, Deborah stroked her hand. First, fate took my daughter away from me, leaving me a son. And now, it has given me a daughter. A few days later, Helen found Deborah sitting at her desk, attentively studying some papers. When she saw her daughter, she gestured to her and asked her to take a seat on a chair. Darling, she began very seriously, I have something important to discuss with you. Helen was wary, knowing from experience that important matters usually didn't promise anything good. Daughter, I know how much you love your work and how eager you are to help people. I really want to expand your capabilities. Today, I received a business plan for opening a new private clinic. I can afford such expenses. We're talking about a private clinic now, but if you want to, you can develop a plan to provide services free of charge to low-income people. You will do what you enjoy, organizing everything as you see fit, and you won't be dependent on anyone. You'll hire qualified doctors and pay them well. Think about it. Helen was sitting completely dazed. A clinic? Her own clinic? What would she do with it? She only knew how to treat people, not how to run a clinic. Well, it definitely sounds great, but how would she fulfill that dream? Will she cope with everything? Deborah read her daughter's thoughts in her eyes. I've invited an expert to help you with your first steps and in the future too. He'll be here tomorrow. Tomorrow is your day off, so talk to him. He can explain everything to you better than I can. All financial matters will be in your hands too. I'm not comfortable with this burden anymore. The money must be in motion, and I want some peace. The next day at 11 o'clock in the morning, a young, handsome man was already crossing the yard, heading toward the mansion. Fidgety Buddy noticed the stranger, became interested, and decided to get acquainted with him urgently. And he did it in an absolutely usual way for himself, but quite unexpected for the guest. He rushed at full speed and jumped on the man with all four paws. It was the peak of his friendliness and an invitation to play. The stranger didn't expect such an attack and fell to the lawn, staining his light-colored suit with grass stains. Helen, seeing what was happening from the veranda, rushed to rescue the man. She was well aware of the power of dog sympathy. Buddy, what are you doing, troublemaker? This is our guest, and you've knocked him down. Is that how you express your hospitality? Buddy continued his joyful hops, accompanied by an intense wagging of his tail, but prudently backed away some distance. The stranger, shaking himself off, was already rising from the lawn. You'll forgive him, Helen interceded for Buddy. It sounds ridiculous, but it means that he likes you very much. He just doesn't know how to express it any other way. Unfortunately. That's good to know, the guest smiled, straightening his crumpled jacket. At least there's some hope for me to stay alive. Buddy, squealing happily, confirmed the man's assumptions, smiling and wagging his tail. I assume you're here to talk about the clinic. Come on inside, I really need to hear your thoughts because I have no idea where to start. By the way, my name is Helen Luke. The guest introduced himself, of course, let's go and talk it over. It's not as scary as it seems at first glance. He smiled again, and the sunlight illuminated the fine wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. For some reason, Helen blushed and hurried with her guest into the house. Years later, Luke, do you know who visited me yesterday? Helen asked hurriedly, finishing her morning coffee. I don't, Luke replied, trying to handle the stubborn tie, nodding in vain. You wouldn't believe it, my first husband. Things didn't work out with his family or his career. He got divorced, quit his job, and is applying for a job at our clinic. And you needed your second husband's permission to do that? Oh, come on, I feel sorry for him, but at the same time, I don't want to see him. Let me fix your tie, stop torturing it. Hire him as a nurse. Luke laughed, either he'll wise up, or he'll leave. Hard work puts a lot of people's brains back in place. What would I do without you? Helen hugged her husband and kissed his smooth-shaven cheek. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.